So thanks everyone. People are coming in. Please, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope things are going well wherever you are, and we are really happy that you can be part of this conversation. And the truth be told, this issue is something no part of the world is excluded from the impact of climate change. And it's really important that we start paying attention and understanding this issue more seriously. So thank you very much. So we are ready to start now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Paul Adepoju. I'm a journalist and I'm the community manager for the International Center for Journalists, Pamela World Forum on Global Crisis Reporting. And the World Environment Day was celebrated globally last week to spur awareness and action around environmental protection. And journalists have played an important role in bringing attention to environmental issues, especially the climate crisis. But it seems increasingly difficult to find new, highly engaging angles to report these issues. And I've had several frontline seats to watch it all unfold. I remember my COP26 experience. I went there with a lot of enthusiasm, but looking back, it seemed like all of the important speeches, including this passionate speech delivered by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Sir David Attenborough's special video, even President Obama's eloquence, in addition to the Prince, or now King Charles's royal presence, still could not spark accelerated actions. And because if you consider the number of deadlocks that still exist on a number of issues that were supposed to be trashed out at some of these global conferences, you begin to ask yourself, probably the trips were not justified by the resolutions that we were able to meet at this conference. And that was so underwhelming for me that I decided to actually skip the next COP in Egypt entirely. And looking back at that same conference too, I wasn't surprised that they didn't deliver on the big promises that we expected. From the perspective of the journalists, I considered press briefing at those sessions to be very boring. And freelance journalists like me had to comb and combine reports to find something important to report. And climate activism had very little impact also. And they didn't draw as much attention as we would have expected, largely because most of the protests were largely restricted to a controlled area throughout the week. On the other hand, oil lobby groups had unrestricted access to the negotiations and negotiators. And it's still a scenario that continues to play out even today, because nowadays, when a new report stresses the danger posed to the environment by human activities, it really grabs media attention beyond the news cycle. For example, if a United Nations Environment Report is released on the same day that a Beyonce concert is held, Beyonce's fans' reactions to probably her daughter's choreography would drown every social conversation around net zero climate financing or any other issue that the report is highlighting. But on the other side, there is a group of climate activists who are grabbing massive media attention. They are called Just Stop Oil, and they are forcing everyone in areas where they operate to pay attention to the threat that fossil fuel is posing to the environment. And we are really glad that they can join us today. If you are not aware of who they are, let me introduce you by showing you one of their videos right now. My tech is acting up, but we'll put through. I think there was a sound on this video, if I'm very correct. Now, if I don't think I should explain, but I think a lot of people have an idea of how important art is, how expensive artwork is, and the fact that they bring the shock value and drive attention, let people actually talk about it, whether you agree with the approach or not. Conversations are being held around these issues that this group is highlighting. And I'm really, really glad that we have some members of this this group with us. So let me start by introducing Grahame Buss, who used to work with an oil company, but is now actively involved with Just Stop Oil. Grahame, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And thank you very much for having me here.
Yes, I would also like to introduce Alex. Alex, who is a climate scientist and had to interrupt his PhD program to more actively get involved with climate activism. Hi, Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, for doing this.
Yes, we're also joined by Fiona Atkinson, who is a grandma and is also a climate activist and is actively involved in helping Just Stop Oil with communicating and expanding its message. Hi, Fiona. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Really thrilled to be here. Brilliant.
And we are also joined by James. James is also an active protester for Just Stop Oil. Hello, James. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me, Paul. It's lovely to be here.
And I want to be sure that Olumide is with us right now. Olumide? Oh, no. Okay, Olumide is still not, but probably Olumide is having network issue. So the first person I think I would like to bring on board to stay this conversation going is Fiona. Fiona, from your personal experience, what was the turning point for you to stop from sitting on the sideline, going about your daily lives, to be more actively involved with Just Stop Oil?
Well, I think it was the feeling that nothing was going to happen. I'd been a member of Greenpeace for years, paid my money over and thought somewhere the grown-ups were taking care of things. And then I realised there weren't any grown-ups coming to take care of things and that we actually all have to step up and do more. And I just got very frightened. And then I got angry that the fossil fuel companies and the governments were in league and ordinary people like myself were so powerless. And by that time I'd become a grandma and I wanted to think about a future for my granddaughter, and I became more and more terrified about what her future would contain if we didn't get some change, if we didn't stop our governments everywhere in the world from carrying on burning fossil fuels and bringing about the end of a livable future.
Yes, absolutely. Then I think two views that I'm interested in, that I think I also am curious to know is the stories of Grahame and Alex. You both are core scientists, and what you are doing probably maybe wrong is quite different from how science operates. Scientists are expected to be doing their research, publishing papers, getting work done. But here you are actively getting involved in climate activism. And I read something on the BBC a couple of days ago that talked about climate anxiety, in which climate scientists that actually know all the science behind these issues seem to be driven to get more actively involved because what they are seeing, the fact that they have access to, that they can understand that the rest of the world cannot understand, makes it uneasy for them to just be restricted to their lab work. Is that what happened to you, Alex? And Grahame, I'd like to know your story also.
Thank you for asking such a great question. So yeah, I joined. I became a climate scientist because I was terrified about this, of course. But one day I was just walking through. I got a flyer said to find out what the young people are doing about the climate crisis, and I had nothing on the next day, so I went along, and it was was life-changing. It wasn't just the usual science you hear of, oh, but what about the economics of this and that? How is this possibly going to look 50 years from now? It was, these are the cold, hard facts. And it was very clear that we had a lot of the solutions and that wasn't being communicated well by journalists, by scientists, and that we just needed to get on with the job. What we do as scientists means nothing if the government's not willing to implement it. And as scientists, as you say, we're sort of taught to be very objective, but we can't be objective when the governments that are opening up oil and gas companies are literally committing a form of genocide by ignoring what we've been saying for decades and pushing through, knowing full well what that means for crops, what that means for our water sources, what that means for all of us. This is going to lead to wars down the line. And it's about time that all of us, including scientists, said, this is not for, the governments are not doing enough. We need to stand up too. And I think that's what a lot of scientists are starting to realize, and they're starting to communicate it better in clearer terms, which people can understand. They're helping people envision it, imagine it, which is so important, instead of just saying 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, which nobody really can comprehend properly.
Absolutely agree with you. I think, Grahame, do you agree with what Alex just said about getting climate reaction, getting too technical that people don't connect with? And what was the turning point for you also? I'm just trying to lay the background so that people that don't know you yet to understand climate activism from your personal stories.
Climate science is very complex, clearly. And sometimes you hear from scientists don't always express it very well. They don't always explain it very well. They often engage in a lot of ifs and buts and probabilities. And I think that doesn't always help. But I think given my personal experience, I mean, I worked a considerable amount of my career working for Shell. And when I joined, actually, Shell was talking way back when I first joined in the 80s about the need to transition out of oil and gas. And I spent half my career working in looking at alternative solutions, non-fossil fuel solutions. And when I left, Shell was still an oil company, still talking about oil and gas. And so what we've seen is a complete failure of the oil industry to deliver. And in fact, very much the opposite. They argue that they can't change faster while spending a huge amount of effort lobbying, as you mentioned yourself, Paul, at COP26. And I've seen the failure of conversation and the failure of government to make the changes we need to see. And I think now our last hope, our best hope is activism. And that's why I'm now part of Just Stop Oil.
Well, before I go to James, I want to quickly introduce Olumide. Olumide is with us right now. Olumide, we would like to see your face if it's possible. Olumide is in the car. It's not the worst place. So Olumide is a Nigerian climate activist. So Olumide, what can you talk about about climate activism in a country like Nigeria, where I believe may not be easy to or realistic to pull off what Just Stop Oil is doing right now?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think the issue we are facing as a country, when you look at the geopolitical zones, when it comes to the polluters, you will be able to understand that people call it greenwashing, meaning that these people are not really ready for what we call transition. You know, we talk about just transition, but what we are seeing now today is that they are looking for an alternative that is not justified, that is not changing the narrative of the kind of environment we need to find ourselves. So I would say that I think it is high time for us as a country to start looking at sustainable just transition plan that is going to take the country or take the continent to where we want to find ourselves. And like what somebody said, the last speaker said, that what we need now is activism. And in a country like Nigeria, if you want to pull activism, then you need to be ready for the kind of situation you need to find yourself. So a lot of people are so scared to, to confront the government to say one or two things. But the best thing that we can start doing is start speaking about it and start writing about the situation we find ourselves and how we can change the narrative of the kind of environment to find ourselves. And Nigeria is just a case study. And this case study is that Nigeria is one of the, I think, the 9th largest country. And the only way we can start pulling this out is to see how we can tell ourselves the truth and how we can make the government accountable and be transparent about the kind of situation they are putting us as a country and as a community. So I think with that, we'll be able to find ourselves a just transition and a just city that will be free from oil spillage, free from gas flaring, and free from the kind of situation we find ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olumide, for that contribution. So, James, you've been on a lot of interviews, and I think several of you have also been on the interviews. What will you describe as your personal experience with journalists? What do you think journalists maybe still be getting wrong in the way they are capturing climate activism and climate activists like you and organizations like Just Stop Oil?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I mean, as you can probably imagine, I'm not very impressed with the majority of journalists and how they cover this crisis and how they cover us. They have a tendency on focusing on tactics when really what we're trying to push is the sort of existential nature of the crisis that we're facing. I mean, for example, recently, I don't know how much you guys might have been paying attention to what's been happening in the UK, but Extinction Rebellion mobilized around 60 to 90,000 people in what was the biggest mass mobilization for an environmental protest in history. And it basically got zero coverage. Around the same time, one of our colleagues disrupted a snooker match, and that elicited an absolute sort of media furore, a huge amount of column inches and front page stories. Obviously, you know, it's stoking mass outrage, but it really sort of highlights the absurdity of our situation, the conundrum that we're in, that if we don't cause disruption, we don't end up getting the sort of coverage that is necessary and is sort of worthy of this crisis. Because unfortunately, I don't know how it is sort of around the world, but in the UK, 5 billionaires own 80% of UK media, which creates quite a hostile environment for us to get our message across.
Then what about you, Fiona? When you look at the media, how the media is capturing climate issues, and of course, when it has to do with climate activists, are you satisfied, or do you share James's sentiment also?
No, I'm not satisfied at all. A colleague of ours, Zoe Cohen, put it beautifully where she said, the way journalism is practiced, news has to be new and different. And given that the climate crisis just goes on and on, it doesn't get covered because it isn't sufficiently different or new. Oh yeah, we know. So that's what drives activists into ever more interesting potentially, or disruptive or controversial actions to get the coverage. So I think it's true to say we experience journalists as barriers that we have to get through or past. They're like the gatekeepers, because the government isn't telling the truth to the people. We have to try and tell, we have to do their job. And then we also have to get past the journalists. And because of what James has just referred to, the ownership of the media, the political ownership of the media, a lot of the journalists, we feel, don't want us to do that, whether it's intentional, or whether they're scared because they might lose their jobs, or whether they're just mad, or whether they don't get it themselves, they're ill-informed. We often feel that we want to say to journalists, do you actually understand what existential crisis means? Do you understand that we are fighting for our lives? So our experience of journalists is that they don't present what is going on with the urgency that is required. So, and that the other thing that they do is they ally us with the climate crisis, then they make us look stupid or mad or hysterical or obsessed. They call us eco-zealots, the eco-mob, even eco-terrorists. So there we are. out there trying to do everything we can to preserve life on this beautiful planet, all life on this beautiful planet, and we get described as terrorists. So what I'm struck by a lot is that myself and the people here and lots of others are spending hours and hours and hours of our time and energy and creativity to get past the barrier of the journalists in order to reach people who have not got the message because of government and journalism and the banks and the fossil fuel companies being in league together against the truth going out there because they want to keep business as usual.
I think I see it from your view. I think it also reflected in how probably the way the questions are being covered, that are being asked, especially in the reports. And I think probably I was reading, like I said, I've been reading a lot, and when there was a report that I read that people are truly and genuinely concerned about climate change, and they want government to do something, but not everybody that is actually expecting government to do something is aligned with climate activism, which still brings us to the fact that when the ideal way, I think you mentioned it, when the ideal way that activism was expected to be conducted is not grabbing attention, when there was a record number of people attending a climate protest that is not getting that media attention compared with probably 3 or 4 activists disrupting a snooker game. It really shows that where the people's attention would always be glued at. And so do you see this as hypocrisy, or what do you think this suggests to us? Not just as, I think the media covers what the people are interested in. So what do you think this suggests about people's interest? Let me give that to James. Okay, Alex, go. James, go for it, then Alex can come. So.
Well, I mean, I don't think, I think by and large, people are sort of aware of the crisis, but they're not necessarily aware to the extent of how bad it is. And that's not through any fault of anyone in particular. I think it's just the fact is that it's been sort of decided amongst our leaders that to diverge from the status quo would be bad for business. But the fact is that we have no choice. We're in the most critical situation that we've ever seen as a species, and that's not hyperbole. You know, 250,000 Somalis were evacuated from their homes in recent weeks. You know, we've got blood orange skies in New York. Parts of Scotland have been on fire for 2 weeks. This is going to affect all of us. I don't particularly sort of I don't view it as any sort of mass conspiracy. I think it's an inherent outcome of the way our economic model works, unfortunately.
Alex?
I think it's very interesting what you say about the media is reporting what people want to hear. This tells about public opinion. I actually don't think that's true. The media are not a lot of the people are incredibly worried about the climate crisis, and the media are refusing to talk about it. And actually what the media do is they're able to sort of control people's opinions about it. For example, in Just Stop Oil, they constantly have these little strategies in interviews in order to other us. They call us middle class so that working class people won't join. And they say that we're only white people so that other people won't join. There's constantly this sort of sense of otherness, that we're activists, not ordinary people. And there's so many other tactics that they have like this in order to try and make sure that our message of no new oil and the message of the climate crisis gets lost. They downplay the climate crisis instead of telling the truth about what it is. For example, BBC News is the biggest news program in the UK, as far as I'm aware. And when they were reporting on the fact that by 2027, just 3 or 4 years' time, we're going to pass 1.5 degrees Celsius as a global threshold. That's a 98% certainty. When they were reporting on that, they said the consequences are there will be more rainfall between the months of April and September in the UK. That's all they said. They didn't talk about wildfires. They didn't talk about mass starvation from crop failure. They didn't talk about droughts. They didn't talk about all of the horrible things that are going to happen. That's not just because the people don't want to hear that. That's because there's actively trying to cover it up. It's not quite a conspiracy, but they have a lot of interest to keep in people in mind, be it from either fossil fuel advertisers or from the government not wanting to stir things up. It's not as simple as this is just public opinion. The majority of the public don't want oil and gas, and that's just being ignored right now and downplayed.
Grahame, I'll come to you right now because you've been with the oil company. Do you believe that everything that the oil companies are ill-equipped or they are powerless to actually drive the shift for the future? And this is the reason I'm asking. Energy seems to be a product, seems to be a service that in as long as the lights in people's houses are on, as long as people are able to move from point A to point B, irrespective of what is driving it, especially the cleaner it is, the better. What do you think is still driving this intentional, or from a perspective of a climate activist, the intentional opposition in some quarters that is driving activists like you to continue to protest? In your mind, and being on both sides, what are you going to blame for this, and what do you think really needs to happen to bring about the desired change?
I think the first thing to recognize is what the fundamental drivers are of the oil and gas industry and coal industry as well. I was talking recently to the head of strategy of a major international oil company, and he said the two key drivers of the oil industry are survival and profit. That's what drives the oil industry. That's why they say they can't change any faster than they are. So they are deliberately holding back the transition to enable them to continue. Now, if the renewable sector was large enough, they'd jump ship. But the only way you can grow the renewable sector fast enough is to shrink the oil and gas sector. So they think that what we'll do is we'll just creep along in the tail of the renewable sector and other zero emission options. And then they'll wait until it's large enough for them to buy into that and sell off their existing assets. So it's that what they're trying to do, what they are successfully doing through lobbying, for example, at COP26, but at all the COPs. I mean, look where the next one's going to be. It's going to be an oil state. It's going to be in the UAE. They are slowing down that transition deliberately to enable them to continue to make profits. Now, if the solutions were already in place, rather than just need to be put in place, they would have jumped ship already.
Oh, but let me also bring in Fiona right now. And so I don't want us to take the attention to the oil industry alone. The goal of this is how can the media do better? What do you believe the media still needs to do much better? I think journalists too are also members of the community. Everybody will still be directly impacted by climate change, by the non-action to actually do things better. So as far as you are concerned, from your own experience interacting with my colleagues, what will you see us do better?
Well, the first thing would be to be well informed, to really know their stuff. When we talk to journalists, we are often thinking, have they read anything? Do they really know their stuff? And if they did, and they still are not taking this seriously, well, how did they read it? Did they emotionally engage with it, or did they just read some kind of briefing? So they, first of all, they need to be well informed, really well informed. And then I think they need to do what I think a lot of us in Just Stop Oil have done, which is to say to themselves, once you've grasped the threat of climate breakdown, everything changes. So are you in it for your career? Do you actually think you're going to have a career in journalism, that you're going to work your way up the greasy pole? And as an example of that, James O'Brien, who's actually one of my favourite broadcasters, but he actually said that he wouldn't go to a talk given by Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil, because he might then become sort of converted, or he might know enough so that he wouldn't be able to think about anything else. And then he would start banging on about it all the time on his show. And then he wouldn't have an audience by Christmas. I think he told me that last summer. So his interest was his own career. And I want to say to him, what career are you going to have in a world where people can't eat or can't drink water or don't have clean air, or whose houses have gone up in flames? So they need to be brave. That's the other thing. They need to be brave and realistic about the kind of world that we're going to have, unless they get their act together. And Grahame was talking about jumping ship. I'd love to see a journalist jumping ship. I'd like to see a journalist getting arrested alongside us. We've had a journalist marching with us in the last week. It would be great if they deliberately got arrested. One journalist did a couple of years, I think a year and a half ago now. She got arrested and she was outraged at what happened to her, but that's where we've got to. So, and the other thing is, I think they need to be determined to tell the truth. They need to go back in their minds to what made them want to become journalists in the first place. And most of us embark on our careers because we want to make a difference and do a really worthwhile job. And the most worthwhile job a journalist could do right now is to pick the side of truth and honor and courage and engage with the reality of climate breakdown.
Alex?
Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot of different answers that you could have here. I'm going to go through them very quickly. The first one is to help people envision it. So for example, instead of saying that it was very hot at the North Pole last summer, it increased by an average of 10 degrees. Say that it was 27 degrees one day at the North Pole, so hot you would take your jumper off at the North Pole. An image like that really connects with people and it sticks in their mind. So talking about these real issues and how it's going to affect people in whichever country they're in, and having something that they can relate to really makes a huge difference in getting people to emotionally connect. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people, they see the horrible effects of the climate crisis, the floods in Pakistan, the wildfires in Canada, and it makes them feel incredibly depressed. Of course, they're horrible. They don't know what they can do. We need to tell people more about what they can do. So the solutions and about civil resistance, why it's important, how it works. We'd be happy to talk to you about social change theory, and so an article about that would be super interesting. And it's also not just about this is the climate crisis, and if we have this many carbon emissions, this is what's going to happen. This is not a faceless crisis. This is a crisis that's caused by the billionaires. It's caused by the oil and gas companies, and it's fueled by subsidies to the oil and gas companies and by profit. So highlighting this area, talking about the politics of it and the social issues of why we are continuing to have the climate crisis is super important and super interesting. And then lastly, talking about the right wing. For example, in the Daily Mail, constantly tell lies about people like Just Stop Oil and about any climate scientist or anyone who speaks out about the climate crisis. So having an article of just pointing out why they're doing that, who funds the Daily Mail, for example, makes a huge difference. So it's about reaching new areas which people don't know about in an interesting way, going on behind just the climate disasters and showing what's really happening. You're on mute, I'm afraid.
And I've already gone with like 3 sentences already. So I want to bring in Olumide to share insights on your experience engaging journalists and especially in your community, and where do you think, what do you think they should do differently? What are your suggestions for journalists?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me quickly, I've listened to the wonderful contribution from everybody. And I think I'm not a journalist. I'm an advocate of climate. But let me tell you something. One of the biggest things that have ever happened to me, for people to actually even know me, is the power of media, the power of journalism that have helped to tell a story that is real and authentic. And another thing I will say again is, to me, I think journalism is a gold and is a resource for, that propel the action that we want to see in the society. But because of the kind of, the way journalists have been, managed, or the way people see journalists, they see them as people that are not really, recognized in the society. But I can tell you, when you want to get a story, when you want to get an action being promoted, let me use the word propagated, then you need to see the power of journalism as a tool. So I'm trying to say now is that we need, from my experience, I think journalism or journalists, they need resources, they need funding to tell the real story, so that the call to action will make the urgency to the government or to the respective responsibility to understand that there is something happening in a particular community, or there is something that needs to be changed. And this is something that I think all the journalists should start looking out for, by working together, building together, and telling stories that will actually drive innovation and drive action that people want to see and talk about. Presently in Nigeria, for those that are not in Nigeria, presently in Nigeria now, the way we see media or the way we see journalists is as if they are coming to beg for money. It's so annoying, because for me, I see them as a resource, and I see them as a partner in building my activism and building my story across the value chain. There's no event or activities that I will do, I will not go along with a media person. I'm in the car and I'm just coming from a particular place. I'm going to tell this story, but the journalists need to tell the story, so that the action that I want to achieve, the aim that I want to make, or my KPI will need to be achieved by the journalist telling the story in a proper way. Let me also end by saying this. I know my brother know about the Niger Delta. If you go on social media now, you will see a lot of people that have written a story about the Niger Delta. Fantastic stories, both in documentary, both in writing. But why are we not having the change that we need? Number one, most time, journalists are not well, when it comes to their rights, when it comes to what we call insurance. Most of them don't have adequate insurance that will sustain or keep them to do what they want to do with all their heart. And most of them don't have funding or financial support to do a story that is going to meet the need of the people, and the community will be able to understand that this story is actually telling the story of what is happening in the community. So I think for me, journalism is key to drive the future we want to see. And journalism is key to also help in telling a successful story, telling a story that touch people's hearts and give them the leverage of making impact in the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Olumide. There is something I want us to now do now. I know your individual interest group. So what kind of stories do you think is still missing out there that I think journalists ought to be paying attention to? And if you have your way, what kinds of stories would you like to read in the media around climate, around fossil fuel? Yes, so I will start with Grahame. With your background, with your experience, with what you know right now, journalists cannot climate activist, but you are climate activist and you know the oil industry much better. What story do you think is out there that is still not written?
Yeah, something that I feel is very important is I think in the wealthier parts of the world, we might call the OECD, the global north, we have to consume less. But I don't think that's true in the poorer parts of the world, in emerging economies, called the global south. But the argument that's made by the oil companies is that they make a case for the demand for energy. But the demand for energy they want to promote is a gas and oil future. The very thing that we had in the 19th century in the UK, particularly, which the fossil fuel revolution, they want to do that in other countries now too. At the very point at which we are talking about stopping the oil and gas age. And I think this is so, that I put it simply, the oil industry lies about this. Now, most of the world could, particularly in parts of the world which aren't already completely tied into the oil and gas industry, they could make that transition so much more quickly through renewable resources. Most of the countries I'm talking about have huge amounts of solar. They could power their country on solar. So I would say that's a story that journalists need to pick up, that we don't need an oil and gas revolution in most parts of the world which are seeking to become richer. Absolutely the opposite. Because what happens when you have resources, the curse of resources, most of that money goes to a small number of people, and most of that oil and gas will be exported anyway. That's the story you should be telling.
Thank you. Thank you. What about you, James? What do you think is still out there, is still missing out there that you believe journalists should be paying attention to?
A lot more coverage on the issues that people have raised so far, but I think the more fundamental problem, at least what we have in the UK, is a lack of independent media. We have a situation in this country where effectively corporations have, for want of a better term, infuse themselves into every single facet of our culture. They've essentially overthrown democracy. I'm aware that that sounds hyperbolic, but I think that the evidence will bear that out. And I think that even if journalists do have the best of intentions, and they, and I'm sure most people come into the field, wanting to speak truth to power and to inform and equip their audience with the critical thinking skills necessary to understand the world. I fundamentally believe that, people want to do that. But the problem is that they'll end up butting up against editors who have to toe a particular party line given to them by the owners of whatever the outlet is. So I think that we really need to be looking at supporting independent media where we find it, because at the current time, most journalists in this country are from the same socioeconomic group as our political leaders and our business leaders that have led us into this problem in the first place. Fundamentally, we wouldn't be in that situation if we sort of saw a return to the more kind of critical type of journalism that we perhaps saw more in sort of during the 70s and before.
Fiona?
Well, I think very similar to James. I think there needs to be more investigative journalism, especially into the financial connections between the oil industry and the subsidies they get from the government and the way the oil industry support the Tory party. I'd love to see that uncovered in the same way as I think people really have grasped what's been going on with the water companies. I think what happened last summer opened people's minds to the fact that the shareholders came first where fresh water in this country is concerned. And we need that kind of exposure of what the fossil fuel companies and have been doing, and how intertwined their money is into every facet of our lives, and the right-wing think tanks that are funded with dark money and that are responsible for some of the messaging that comes out in the newspapers against groups like ourselves, like Just Stop Oil and other climate campaigners. We are up against something that's very difficult to explain in a 5-minute interview. So it was brilliant. It would be brilliant if journalists were able to do that deep level exploration of what is going on behind the scenes, the vested interests involved.
Alex, I'm coming to you.
I think all the previous answers have been absolutely fantastic. James in particular is very on the money about editors, and Fiona is absolutely right as well. I think those take priority, but it would also be fantastic to see some more about, for example, the effect of civil resistance, how it's worked in the past, why it worked. I think that's a very interesting angle that's often overlooked, and how, for example, the media, other people, how they use these subconscious tactics in order to try and diminish the effect of movements and of people speaking up about the climate crisis in general. And the second thing that comes to my mind is to not only just talk about the solutions, but to talk about how much better the future could be if we were going on a better pathway. Like, for example, having cleaner air if we had renewables, because there's 10 million deaths around the world from air pollution. If we had more insulation so people's homes were warmer, if we had better public transport, if we had a better economic system that wasn't based on infinite growth, which we cannot do. So talking about how we could shape a future that works better for everybody, having more income equality, and how we could be closer to other people and make sure that those in the poorest social backgrounds are not the ones who are going to be left behind when the climate crisis gets even worse than it already is.
Then Olumide, last but not the least, what story suggestions do you think we used to like to read from journalists?
Okay, for me, I'll be speaking in the context of Nigeria. Number one, when you look at the story of the net zero because of the target by 2060, I think it's very important for us to start looking at stories that looks at the low emission issue in Nigeria, and also to be talking about the story that is linking to the oil spillage, that's gas flaring in the Niger Delta area, which is a very key story that journalists should start looking at, because it's going to really drive a lot of attention and urgency for the government to look into. Then the last one is the one that is actually affecting us day in, day out, which is the flooding issue. Because of flooding that we see present, as I'm talking to you, it's raining bitterly or really in Lagos. And this is across the country. So we need stories from the local perspective, not just from somewhere you get the data from, but from people that actually are actually facing the consequences of all these issues. Those kind of story will actually prompt our government and prompt institutions to inject support and inject funding and financing into the climate issue that we are facing as a country, as a continent. And it's also going to drive enough awareness for people to understand that these are the kind of problem we want to solve. So those are the kind of story I think is very important. Journalists should be looking at for the development of such communities they are working from. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And there is something about, I know the climate situation is very, very dear. Let's look at progress being made so far. And if you are going to, let's say, look at what I think Just Stop Oil has consistently been adamant about its request, what it desires, and it has been consistent. You have been consistent in your messaging about what needs to happen for your protests and actions to stop. Let's talk about what you believe you have achieved so far, and that you believe is a motivation that this approach still works. I remember watching an interview that James had with another organization that used to be activism driven too, but is now taking a sit back approach. So let's look at what has been achieved so far, that still convinces you that this approach of climate activism is the right way to go? Who wants to take that? If anybody is not indicating, I'll go with James. But who would like to go with that question? Okay, James. James is already indicating, yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think obviously we're not the only people working on this, so I wouldn't dare take full credit. But since the Just Stop Oil campaign began, we've now seen all major political parties, bar from the Conservatives, who are the ones in power at the moment, agreeing in some form or other with our demand. We've also seen the Scottish Parliament agreeing with our demand, as well as the Welsh Assembly. And we're seeing this sort of general trend towards the kind of toxification, if you will, of oil and gas as an idea. And I think that, you know, oftentimes, like, we're accused of turning people away from the cause, and that we end up talking about our tactics rather than the message. But the fact is that history has shown time and time again that where civil resistance occurs, it opens up a space in the public discourse where we can have conversations like this. And even if there is a certain amount of attention onto, say, an action, even if you've elicited, you know, millions of conversations, if a small percentage of them are discussing our demand of no new oil, gas, and coal, then it's a win for us. And it's sort of important, I think, for journalists to understand that civil resistance plays a role in agenda seeding. It doesn't necessarily tell people what to think, but it sort of it influences what the public thinks about. And I mean, we saw this at the back end of 2021, where the Insulate Britain campaign, which was highly controversial, after that had wound up, mentions of housing insulation in the British press more than doubled. So we can just sort of see how it sort of percolates out and has an impact.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm muted again. Fiona?
Yeah, I have one that I really enjoy, which is that when I listen to presenters and they've got a phone in going on, and somebody will phone in and say, well, this climate crisis is a load of old rubbish. And the presenter will say, if I had a member of Just Stop Oil here now, they would say, and they quote us, and they really know our arguments. So that's been a moment of triumph that I've enjoyed.
All of you, Grahame, what has been your motivation to continue to be actively involved in this approach?
I think it's the power of non-civil resistance to bring about change. I genuinely believe in that. And it's not clear whether we will succeed, but I think this is our best hope. And that's why I continue to do it, and I will continue to do it. I think what we have to recognize about this is that if we don't do this, this discussion doesn't happen. And that's why the government is introducing legislation to try and prevent us from taking the actions that we do, because they want to remove it from the public's imagination. It's kind of the opposite exactly of what James is saying we are trying to do. They want to do the opposite. So their position on the climate crisis is, their solution to it from their perspective is to shut down the public debate. So their solution to the climate crisis is more police powers. But even the police in this country have said, you can't arrest your way out of a climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. You can't arrest your way out of the climate crisis. There's a question that is burning me, I think, for you and Alex. I think you've taken a part of it. Alex, as a climate scientist, how do you see climate science, fellow scientists that are still conducting the research? Do you think we have more than enough evidence already, or how do you see climate scientists that are also still passionate, that are very passionate about climate issues? Well, they are passionate in climate issues. That's why they are researching, conducting research in it. But what do you think the climate science ecosystem can still do, considering it seems as if the reports and analysis are not still doing as much as they can. Or what do you think about climate science, climate activism, and what the science ecosystem can still contribute?
Well, quite simply, we have all the solutions to the climate crisis. We know what we need to do, and more scientific research is not going to change that. Scientific research, recycling, all of these other things, it's just mopping up with the tap open while we're still pushing through with oil and gas and coal and all these other things which are actively killing us. So while it's super important that we continue to have these scientific breakthroughs, continue to make renewables more accessible, more affordable, ultimately, I think one of the best things that scientists can be doing right now is speaking out, finding ways to communicate the science that currently already exists to wider audiences in order to try and get more people involved, in order to try and make the change that we need to happen.
Yes, thank you very much. I wasn't planning to take any questions. I think we have a lot of, we're already on time, but 2 questions came in. Hopefully we can quickly take it, which are precautions around better climate action news reporting. I think you've already mentioned it. If you still want to do more contributions, if you still want to say more around how journalists should better report on climate action, that is one. The second question is, given that developing countries cannot expect an oil revolution, are there any successful examples of collaborative initiatives between journalists, scientists, and policymakers in developing countries that have effectively communicated the urgency of climate change and facilitated meaningful actions? If so, what can we learn from these examples? So, which is actually you telling us what very good stories are out there that truly reflect what is happening. And yeah, so who wants to take that question?
I'm not. I'll have a go. I'm not sure that I'm not sure I know that much about individual cases. But what I can say is that when you don't have oil and gas reserves and coal reserves, then the governments are very keen generally on transitioning out of oil and gas, because there's no good reason to do it, and it's nation states which have significant amounts of oil and gas who tend to be the ones who want to continue in the oil and gas industry. But that's even in countries where they have significant alternative resources, and I think it's because it's that those resources are not, the oil and gas resources are not being used internally; they're being sold abroad. Even if they want to use them internally, they have to sell them abroad to transform them into products they can use. So I think you generally find that the call for change from nation states comes from, well, one, from countries which are already experiencing very significant issues, such as island states, and then 2, from countries which don't have oil and gas reserves. Once you've got oil and gas reserves, then the lobbying kicks in, the greed kicks in, and then you're back to square one.
Yes, I agree with you. Does any other person want to make any contributions regarding the questions? Regarding probably, do you have model examples of probably really good stories out there that really reflect how you think the climate activism and climate journalist relationship can work? Do you have any, has anyone been done that is meticulous? And another person is asking if we have support for climate reporters wishing to tell climate action stories. Yes, Usman, there are lots of information around available support funding for journalists that want to cover climate stories. I think one of the good things that organizations like Just Stop Oil and other advocates have been able to achieve is actually bringing attention to the need to report on climate actions. And there are lots of opportunities, lots of funding available. for journalists that actually want to cover these news, these issues. And I encourage you to check out, we curate these opportunities for journalists on IJNet is doing a great job curating funding opportunities for journalists. So just go to ijnet.org/opportunities, and you are going to actually be able to see some of them. Before the end of the week, I'm going to share some information regarding available reporting opportunities for journalists that want to cover climate action. And so if you're not a member of our Facebook forum, please make sure you are part of that forum, because that is where we often share information around opportunities, resources, tools, and other skill sets that we believe would help you in your journalism career. I've already put the link in the chat box, and I just wanted to check it out. If you're not a member of that forum, please click the link, be a member of that forum. And yes, so I believe I would want to take the last remarks from our panelists, because we've already overshot the time. And I also want to thank those that are watching this, everybody that is watching this live stream on Facebook right now. I'm looking at the chat box, it's quite engaging, and you are also well aligned with what we are discussing on this discussion. So I would like to take the last remarks from our panelists. Let me start with James. James, going forward, what are your last thoughts for our forum members?
Just thank you very much for hosting this, Paul. It's really refreshing to know that there are journalists out in the world that are actually taking this seriously, and it does actually sort of fill me with some hope, actually, and hearing sort of tales of activists around the world actually sort of stepping up, it fills me with hope. So much solidarity to everyone who's on the front line of this fight. Yeah,
what about you, Alex?
It's hard to distill all this into just one final thought. It's fantastic to be here, and I wish you were all here in the UK so we could work better in reporting the climate crisis here at home. Our journalists are frankly terrible, and I hate the constant othering and pretending that we're all terrorists. So this is refreshing, and I can't wait to see some of the articles that come out of this and some of the investigative journalism, so I can learn even more. Thank you.
Grahame?
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. I would say that if you're a mainstream journalist, look at the very, very good journalism that's done by specialists in this area, and then make it simple, make it accessible, and give real examples that are based on people's real lives. Now, take away all that complex maths and physics and tell a simple story, because it's all there in the literature. Thank you.
That's really nice. Thank you very much. Olumide?
Yeah, thank you very much. My own message is very simple. I am looking forward to see as many as possible journalists to work with in telling the story that is going to change the narrative of the kind of environment we want to see across the continent, across the community, because that is the only way we can send a signal or a message to the people that need to hear the story and to the people that need the solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we are closing with the way we started with Fiona. Fiona, give us the grandma.
Don't have to keep saying that. Well, I'm hesitant to follow that last call to action because it was so brilliant. But I was trying to think why I felt so good today. And I realized because journalism was coming to us, and we're usually constantly trying to reach the journalists and trying to get there, and you were coming to us, and that felt so good. And I'd like to end with something I was told today, and I think it's Denmark. There's a hashtag going all around Denmark. Can we get it going around the world? And it's hashtag clear the front page for climate. And I think that is a brilliant hashtag. Clear the front page for climate.
Thank you very much. Hopefully, media houses can be able to pull that off because it's long overdue, is important. And I just want to thank you very much for everything that you do. Thank you very much for continually putting attention on the issue of climate change and finding a way to keep people talking about it, whether they like it or not. And the more these conversations are going, the more they are compelling governments to come to terms with the fact that they can no longer continue to ignore it. So on behalf of the International Center for Journalists, I want to thank you very much. We are always in support of helping journalists that are struggling to come to terms with these issues, to know how to handle these issues, and also connecting them with resources and experts that resource persons that will be useful to their stories. And I just want to tell journalists out there that the Just Stop Oil is media friendly, they are receptive. So if you are trying to work on a story and you need their input or an expert from them, you can easily reach out and send a message to me. I'm going to facilitate it and put it all together. Olumide Idowu is also, if you are in Nigeria or any other part of Africa, Olumide Idowu is also accessible. I can facilitate that relationship, and you can get your story going. Insights from this story, from this webinar, will also be put together as a resource by the HighJNet platform, and we are also going to endeavor to extensively share this video and other materials that we can generate from this session to develop guidance for journalists that are interested in covering climate activism. My name is Paul Adepoju, and I say thank you very much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much to our panelists, and I wish you the best. Have fun. Yes, so please look at the message. Alex has put the email there, juststopoilpress@protonmail.com. They are going to respond.